Okay, so for number four, you're given a table, and then the table is basically showing you the marginal cost for each firm to eliminate 1 unit of pollution from their production process. So basically, kind of what we can see here, and just to uh, kind of say what that process looks like. So for example, for firm A to eliminate 1 unit of pollution, or their first unit of pollution, it's going to cost them $50. So for the question, then the question's asking you, what should the government set their corrective tax to if they want to eliminate 5 units of pollution? So the way you kind of solve this question is you first try to see which units of pollution which 5 units of pollution are below a certain price. So for example, for the first unit of pollution, we can see the lowest price is going to be $27. So that's going to be our first unit of pollution. So let me just make a little check mark next to it. So that's going to be our first. The second is going to be the $50. Then firm B actually is cheaper for them to eliminate their second unit than it is for firm C or D to eliminate their first. So we have currently 3 units of pollution elimination checked. So then we're going to move to 54, which is the next cheapest to eliminate. Then we're going to move to 62, which is the next cheapest to eliminate. So then we can see here that we have 5 units of pollution. So what that means then is that any price above $62, which is the last unit of pollution eliminated, the cost to eliminate that unit, and below 72, because 72 is the next price basically for pollution elimination right here. So that's kind of how you want to look at these questions. Basically, determine how much pollution you need to eliminate, and that's how you determine the price you can set. So basically, for this one, it's going to be any price above 62, which is the 5th unit of pollution eliminated, and the cost to eliminate that, in below 72, which is the next unit of pollution elimination.
So I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
Can you explain how, I mean, those first 3 units of pollution, they're all below $62. And so the question's saying any price above $62 and below 72, but that wouldn't eliminate, how would that encompass those other 3?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So basically, think of these prices below 62 as being, so the firm either can eliminate that pollution, that unit of pollution, for $27 or pay a corrective tax to the government. So because the tax of $62 is less than the cost to the firm to eliminate this unit of pollution, the firm's going to decide to eliminate that unit of pollution rather than pay the tax of $62. So like, for example, for 93, so the firm's not going to eliminate pollution because it would cost them $93 to eliminate that unit of pollution. And since the tax is between 62 and 72, it's going to be cheaper for the firm to pay the tax to the government than it is for them to eliminate that unit of pollution at $93.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions on number 4?
Yeah, so basically you start at the lowest price and just go up from there, counting the units of pollution. And then when you get to the 5th one, that's the price it should be above. And then the next highest one would be the below price.
Exactly. And the question on the exam is not going to ask you for like a range. It's going to say, what price could the government charge if they wanted to eliminate 5 units of pollution? So basically for that, you would just need to count the units of pollution and then know that a price between you know, 62 and 72 would allow the government to eliminate 5 units of pollution.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so number 8 from the midterm exam. Okay, so let me see which midterm exam that was. Was it this midterm exam or the other midterm exam?
Yeah, this one.
This one, okay. Okay, so this one is asking about a country, so a country called Old Zealand. Old Zealand does not allow trade of good X. So so they give you the domestic market curve here, and then they also give you the supply curve. So then they tell you that the country decides to allow trade for good X. And so then they give you the world price for that good. So when they give you the world price, you kind of know you have to do a couple things. So the first thing you want to do is, as it says right here, compute the domestic equilibrium. So to do that, you're just going to set the demand curve and supply curve to equal to one another, and then you're going to solve that for the price and quantity. And for this one, it's a little weird because the quantity is, rather than Q, it's actually X. So just note here that X is actually the quantity of the good and not the just kind of like a random variable. So when you solve both of those, you get the quantity is 30 in the domestic market and the price is 40 in the domestic market. So when you're given the world price is 30, you know that this country is going to, when they open for trade, become an importer because the world price is lower than the domestic price. So because of that, what you need to do now is you have to just plug in the world price into the demand and supply equations. And so then when you do that, you get the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied in the domestic market. So then the difference between the domestic demand and the domestic supply, as it says right here, that is going to be the amount of imports. And so then that's how you can determine the number of imports that are into the country. Does that process kind of make sense as far as how to kind of go about solving that one?
Yes, and for example, if there was a tariff involved, so would you just do, like, if it was like a $2 tariff, would you just do 32?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Because basically for tariff, you're just increasing the world price.
So we're just at the end of it, like after, it's like the regular stuff we did in the first midterm per se, is just after we have to plug in the world price to the demand and the supply equation. And
exactly.
Minus what that first equation gave us, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think I got it.
Awesome. Okay. So then the next question was number 21 from the midterm. So
Oh, it was the other midterm. Oh no, is this the one from the review session that we did, or is this?
I think so. Yeah, let me go to 21 and see if it looks like the right question.
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay.
So this one, I understand this economies of scale and stuff, but the only thing I don't understand, so like for choice C and for choice D, it's kind of confusing because like when the quantity is at 200, only one of the factories are at 200. The average total cost, only one of the factories are at 200, so like that was what confused me. And then for D, it says the average total cost of production will be the same whether it's 300 or 400. And when I look at the chart, like the numbers are the same but the order is different, so like it's just a little confusing.
Yeah, this question is weird because it's one of those that's like asking you what is not true, and the way they're doing this is, it's weird because they don't specify like which factory they're referring to. So like for C, where you already said like the long run average total cost of production per tablet is 200, when 200 tablets are produced in the long run. So I think what they're saying, what they intend to mean with that is as long as one of the factories meets that condition, then it's true. So like because one factory meets that condition, that one will be true. And then the same for D as well, because factory 2 meets that condition for 300 and 400.
So would it be like a correlation? Because the graph, the chart shows like short run, and the problem is talking about the long run. So like, would it just be like, is it like related to like in the long run they'll choose the factory that's like the lowest cost, or is that like not related?
Yeah, it could be the way, let me see too. It could be that the tier 1 factory. Oh, okay. Yeah, so basically yeah, that's exactly correct. So basically they're going to choose the lowest cost factory at each production level. So because for factory 1, the lowest is 100 and 200, and then it switches at 3 and 400, and then it switches again at 500. So yeah, basically they're just going to choose the appropriate factory size to get to the lowest total costs at each quantity.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I think, let me see, 21, 5. Okay. Is this the number 5 that you were thinking of?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this one gives you the basically just like a small little table that's telling you the amount of goods produced from each country. And so the question's asking you, at which of the following prices would both US and China gain from trade for each other? So this is the one where you basically have to compute the opportunity costs of production for every single good. And I kind of, not to like kind of flip between, but the way that I usually like doing that personally is, so I basically put it into a separate table like this, and then just compute the costs kind of on a lower table, just so I can see what the trade-off is going to be. And so we know that when we're looking for terms of trade, we need to see what are the terms of trade going to be between the two opportunity costs. So like, for example, this one is between 10 and 5. So for this question, when we compute the opportunity costs, we first do it for cell phones. So we're going to take the computers over cell phones to get 2 computers, and then we'll do it for China as well. So we take the 24 over 3 to get us 8 computers. So then with that, we know that the US has a comparative advantage to produce cell phones since 2 is less than 1. And so then we're just going to do the same opportunity cost calculation for computers. So for China, we do have the 1/8 cell phone, and for the US, we have the 1/2. So then China has a comparative advantage in the production of cell phones. So now what we need to do is we need to determine the terms of trade. So we're given a couple options here, and we basically just kind of have to see if those options are between the terms of trade that are possible. So we can see that like they're saying here, it's a good deal, would be that the US has more computers and China has more cell phones. So that's kind of like the idea that both countries are going to be better off when they're trading. So because of that, we know that the relationship has to be somewhat advantageous. So like if we're looking at the computer to cell phone, we can see it's like a 2/8 relationship, which would be a 1/4 relationship. So if we take a look at like which one is closest to a 1/4 relationship, or there is one that actually is a 1-4 relationship, which would be A. So that would be the only one that's correct, because all of these other ones are either too large or too small to facilitate trade.
Okay, so here at the end, you're comparing like the 2 computers to the 8 computers. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
compare
And
the computer to the cell phone for the final answer.
yeah. And I always find it's kind of helpful to do like, when you're doing comparisons, to do it with like the full numbers rather than like the fractions, just because it's like a little bit easier to understand, even though in this case they're basically like exactly the same, because 1/8 and 1/2. But
Okay, got it. Thank you.
yeah. Okay, so let me make sure. Okay, I think so. I think those are all the questions that everyone's asked. But if anyone else has other questions, feel free to unmute yourself or type into the chat while I'm going to the practice study guide. Okay, so I think the last time I did 1 and 2 on Thursday. So I'm going to just go over really briefly 3. 30 practice midterm fixed costs not counted. Yeah, midterm practice. Yeah, so let's see. 30. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's 100% correct. Alexander, does that make sense as far as the reason why that's why the correct answer is for number 30?
I don't understand. If it's the total cost, is that only variable then?
Yeah, so like for this one, what they're trying to do is like, they're kind of trying to trick you, because basically, so they give you the fixed cost, and then they tell you when she produces 100 pounds of cookies, it costs her $45 on average. So then she knows that her marginal cost of producing 101 pounds of cookies is $300. So basically, what you can kind of do for this question is basically ignore the 45, because this piece is actually not relevant when you're thinking about the question, because what they tell you here is, so you have her fixed costs, and then you have the marginal cost of producing the 301st pounds of cookies is $300. So what you know from that basically is you can get the variable cost, because for marginal cost, you're just taking the total cost over the quantity. And then you also have the fixed cost. So you basically just have to add those together. And I don't remember the answer for that one, D. Yeah, so basically you're just gonna have to take that per each unit. So like you have the total cost for 100, then you have to add in the fixed costs, and then you have to add on the 300. So let me see if I can write the math here really quickly. So you have the 500 plus the 45 times 100, and then you have to add the 300. And that should give you the, what is it? 53, I think, was that the answer? I'm trying to remember.
The answer was 4,800.
48, okay. Let me try to add that up then really quickly. Plus the 5.
So Professor, I did it a different way. Basically, the way I looked at it was I had the same issue at first. I also got 5,300, but then when I reread the question, it said in her first year of operation, she has a fixed cost of 500. And then the second part says when she produces 100 pounds, it's 45 on average in total. So average total cost is fixed and variable together. So I feel like the first part, the 500 is completely irrelevant because to make 100 cookies would just be 4,500. And then the marginal cost is change in average total cost over change in quantity. So she's only adding 1 more pound of cookies. So the change in quantity would just be 1, which means to add another pound of cookies would just cost her an extra 300. So 4,500 plus 300 would be 48.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, so basically what you're gonna have is like this. And plus the 3. Yeah, and you can ignore this completely because this is included exactly as was said before in the average total cost. Yeah, and this is on the, I think, which one is this? I think this is the first practice midterm, so not the most recent one, but the oldest one on Blackboard. Yeah, and then that would give you the 48. Exactly. Yeah, so I don't think there are any kind of like questions that are kind of like this where they include extra information, but definitely always make sure to, like, when you're looking at a question, because some faculty members like to include trick questions like this. So just remember, which I didn't the first time I read this question, that when they're saying average and total or total costs, the fixed costs are already included. This is something that I've seen on a couple of exams before, where they try to trick you into thinking that either fixed or variable costs are not included in the total cost. So definitely just be aware of that for sure.
Professor, will we be able to go over number 14 on the first practice midterm?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, let me make sure that I didn't miss any others. Yeah, okay. So yeah, number 14 on this midterm?
No, the other midterm.
Other one, okay.
No, like just the regular spring one midterm. Yeah, this one.
Okay, yeah, let me clear the drawings and go 14. Okay, 14, okay. So let's see what this one's asking. Quantity. Okay, so this one is giving you demand curve or demand equation supply, and then they're telling you that there's a negative externality of $24 per ton from fracking. So then because of that, the government imposes a $24 tax per ton, basically because they're trying to get the industry to internalize that negative externality. So the first thing you want to do with this question is, like it says right here, is just basically, so before the tax is set, you want to try to solve for the equilibrium. So basically, you just want to put the demand curve and supply curve to equal to one another. And when you do that, you get the quantity is 30. And then to compute the surplus, what you'll do, and let me draw the graph too.
One quick question. So
Yeah.
on the equations where it says 200 for the demand curve and 200, those are the lowest and highest points on the supply and demand curve, correct?
Oh, for computing the producer and surplus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Is that always true, or that's going to be the highest point on the?
yes, most of the time. Very, very rarely it won't be.
Okay, cool. Because you wouldn't know that. The only reason I was having trouble computing the total surplus was because I didn't realize that was the height of the demand, like at zero.
Yeah, and so the weird thing with this one too, and the thing you want to keep in mind is like, so for the externalities, we have the normal like demand curve and the normal supply curve. But remember that the supply curve with a negative externality, actually there's this social cost curve. So like this is the social cost curve. So just keep in mind, like when you're thinking about the surplus, that there are these two separate curves, and so that kind of changes the calculation for the surplus. So just kind of an important piece to keep in mind there when you're thinking about that. And like, so for example, just to kind of go over this,
it changes total surplus before the tax. It changes total surplus
after the tax.
After the tax.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, for that clarification. Yeah. So yeah, I can definitely go over the formula too. So for the total surplus, so basically this 200 is coming from here, and then the 20, they're basically just taking from here and plugging it down here. But once again, you can do this like most of the time, but the way I would usually suggest doing it, and let me go to, so normally, let's see. Yeah, so normally I included in the chapters 3 and 9 kind of like the process steps for it. So normally what I personally like to do is, so like, for example, for consumer surplus, you need 3 different things for that. You need the equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and the maximum price. And then for producer surplus, you need equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and minimum price. So I usually prefer to do it this way just because I think it's like a little cleaner to compute it, but you definitely can do it this way as well. That's not to say that like one way is more or less correct than another way. It's just this way is kind of like a little bit of a shorter way. And the 30 here would be the price for that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So like the general formula here would be like total surplus equals total surplus minus total externality cost.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Like a general formula like all the time.
Yes, when you're dealing with an externality, yeah.
So it's not only for negative, it's also for positive externality?
Yes, with the one difference that for positive, you're actually adding the externality cost because it's a positive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Could you repeat that, Juliana?
I said that total surplus equals total surplus minus total externality cost for negative externality. And then for positive, it's just plus the total externality cost.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And I also have another question, Professor.
Yeah.
So, in the questions that I've seen so far, there was like a difference, like, so positive externality deals with value and the negative externality deals with cost.
Yeah, and so usually what they're referring to with positive externality is, you can think of it like as a benefit or value. So basically it's like adding something, it's giving additional value, whereas like a negative externality is taking a cost away. So it's like adding an additional burden into the market.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I got a question, Professor.
Yeah.
For the equation 200 minus 20, would it always be the demand 200 minus the supply 20? Because the negative matters here.
Yes. Yeah. So if you're kind of struggling if you have less time, that's an okay way to do it. The only thing with that that I kind of caution is like, so total surplus is technically producer and consumer surplus. So when you're taking these two together, you have to assume that these both have zeros, because basically these two, by having a quantity of 0, that cancels those out. So then you're left with 220. If one of these is not multiplying by quantity, like for example, if this one was just like 200 minus 4, that would not work, because the multiplying by 0 quantity is required for you to be able to just use these two to get to this kind of total surplus cheat here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just to kind of elaborate on that a little further, basically because these both have the quantity is multiplying by the only other number in the equation, that is a cheat way, or not a cheat way, but just a way to simplify the equation and give you the minimum price and the maximum price in the equation without you having to solve anything else. Like normally we have to do the set quantity equal to 0 to find the maximum and the minimum. For this one, you don't really need to do that, because when you set the Q equal to 0, it just gives you the minimum and maximum price. So yeah, that's a very, very important point for this one. Okay, let me check. So I think that was it as far as questions. But if anyone else has any. Yeah, so for this one, so do you want me to shade where total surplus is before the externality or after the externality? Before, okay. So before, we're gonna have, let me choose a different color. So before, we're just gonna have the normal surplus. So we're basically gonna have, here's our equilibrium price. Let me erase this because I went a little too far. And so this is going to be total surplus. So like our normal consumer and producer surplus, where we have the intersection demand and supply, and then consumer surplus is the upper triangle, and producer surplus is the lower triangle. Yeah, and so after, so let me get a different color. So remember that when the externality shifts up, the price is increasing. So this is going to be the new price, and this is going to be the new quantity. So you can still think of the surplus in the same way. So we're going to have surplus here. So it's still that same triangle. Just the difference is that you're kind of following the shift. So it'll be like basically that normal shift that we thought of in like chapter 4 is still applicable to the surplus calculation. Yeah, so this little triangle up here. Yeah, practice midterm, study guide question 4. Yes. Okay, so let me clear and okay. Question 4. Was this a question you were thinking of for the pollution? Okay, perfect. So yeah, let me go over this one again. Yeah, this one's definitely a very important question. Okay, so the first thing you want to think about when you think about this question is imagine that, so there are 4 different firms here, and they give you the marginal cost to eliminate the first unit, second unit, third, and fourth. So when this question asks you what should the government set their corrective tax to if they want to eliminate 5 units of pollution? So the first thing to remember is that they're always going to eliminate the cheapest units of pollution first. So the cheapest unit of pollution here is going to be the 27 from the first unit from firm B. The second cheapest is actually going to be there 2. So 1 from firm, I think my screen froze, which is weird. Let's see. That's definitely not good.
Professor, you're on mute.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, so sorry about that. Okay, let's see if we can get back to where we were. Okay, so I was going over question 4 from the study guide, I think. Does that sound right to everyone?
Yeah, that's the right question.
Okay, so let me start doing that again. I look forward to taking my computer in to get repaired because I guess it needs to be repaired. Okay, so this question we're basically thinking about, or trying to think about, how to determine where the government should set the tax, the corrective tax. So we already know that the lowest cost unit to eliminate pollution is firm B, eliminating the first unit, which is a cost of $27. So the next cheapest cost is from firm A to eliminate their first unit, in firm B to eliminate their second unit. So now we currently have 3 units of pollution eliminated. So then the next cheapest is firm C to eliminate their first unit, which is 54. Then the final cost is firm D to eliminate their first unit, which is 62. So we're now at the 5 units of pollution eliminated. So we know that the price to eliminate pollution, 5 units of pollution, has to be above 62 or below 72, which is the next cheapest units of pollution to eliminate. Does that kind of help with that question, or does anyone have any other questions on that one? Because that is an important question to understand. Awesome. Okay. So then, and I think the chat was cleared too, but I know there was another question. So if you had another question, feel free to either unmute yourself or pop it into the chat too, because I'm pretty sure there were other questions as well. 2 on the study guide and 26. Okay. So 2 on the study guide. So let's go. Okay. So.
Oh wait, Professor, actually it wasn't 2, sorry, it was 3.
3, okay, yeah.
So I understand this question fully. I just have like a quick question. So here, obviously, it's being added to the external cost of 15 is being added to the supply curve. Yeah, because it's on the production. So if it would have said like onto the consumers or the consumption, it would have been added to the demand curve.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And when the only thing I'm a little confused about is like, what would the terminology be of the problem if it were to be like a subtraction of the 15 instead of an addition?
Okay. So if it was a subtraction, so for negative externalities, it's always going to be an addition because you're always adding the cost onto the existing curve. So for negative externality, you always see a plus because it's basically like a tax. You can kind of think of it as like a tax.
So if it were to say positive externality, it would be a minus?
So if it was a positive externality, they would have to word the question in a very specific way.
Okay.
Because yeah, I wouldn't worry about that one because I know that there will not be one on positive externalities, but the reason why it would have to be just kind of briefly worded a specific way is because remember for positive externalities that unless the government subsidizes the production, the price actually increases as well. And so when the price increases, we would still most of the time treat it like an addition, like an additional tax. But the difference would be that we would also expect quantity to increase. So it would have to operate on the demand curve rather than the supply curve.
Okay, thank you, Professor.
Yeah. In number 26 on practice midterm 2. Okay. Practice midterm 2. Okay. 26.
I think it's the other one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me. Yeah, because yeah, the other one did not have the 26. Okay, so Moonlight Coffee is a firm producing 2,000 coffee drinks per day with an average total cost of $5 and a marginal cost of $2. So if production were to increase to 1 additional coffee drink per day, which of the following might occur? Okay, and they are, let's see, okay.
Would it just be in this case like the rules that we learned, or like is there any math involved here?
Yeah, so average total cost. Oh, okay. So you can tell the average total cost would be decreasing because the average total cost at 2,000 is $5 a day, and the marginal cost is 2 at 2,000. So if you increase one more, these are not going to significantly change. And so at this point, you know that average total costs are decreasing because marginal cost is lower than average total cost.
So in this case, it would just be the rules that we learned.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let me check. Okay, I think that was all of the questions. So let me go to 5 from the midterm 2 practice math study guide. So you might not see a question exactly like this one on the midterm, but the kind of general concept and like the way you need to think about accounting and economic profit are very similar. So for this one, basically you're given, so Alexander owns a factory. He makes 1,000 lures per year and sells them for $100 each. So you know then that, let me just draw, that this is going to be his revenue or profit. So that's going to be kind of your starting point. And then you're going to be given a bunch of costs. So in this case, you know that he pays $25,000 for raw materials. So this is going to be a part or something that you need to take out of his accounting profit. Then the next thing you're told is he invested $100,000 in the building and equipment. So $50,000 was from his own savings and $50,000 was borrowed at 10%. So the next piece that you need to take out of the accounting profit is this, the interest that he is paying on the borrowing costs, which in this case, you would just do the 50,000 times 10%, which is 5,000. So that's going to be the accounting profit. So the economic profit then, you also have to subtract the $40,000 that he could work or he could earn at a competing factory because that's his opportunity cost. And then the final piece is the $50,000 in his own savings, which he could have earned 10% interest on as well. So when we do that, we see that his economic profit is $25,000. So question won't be exactly the same, but kind of the way you need to think about accounting and economic profit will be. So economic is like opportunity cost, things you could have done, Whereas accounting profit is like you're actually paying that money out. You're actually paying for that specific cost. Yeah, so any other practice problems? So let me clear this. And so I kind of included like other notes as well at the end of the midterm 2 practice math study guide. So things I would like make sure to look for is like any questions on any of the slides that I went over that deal with any of these things. Definitely make sure to understand those questions as well and how to work through them.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you just quickly go over absolute advantage and opportunity cost?
Yes, absolute advantage and opportunity cost, yes. So absolute advantage is basically just having the total of greater production. And let me actually go to an example here, because I think that's maybe a little more helpful to see it like in the real, in a real example. So like, for example, if we're thinking about the US and China, so we can see here that the US has a absolute advantage in the production of both food and clothing. So the US can produce more total clothing than China and more total food than China. But where we get into opportunity cost and comparative advantage is when we're looking at the comparison between those two. So if we scroll down.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with like, just because they have absolute advantage doesn't mean they should be producing it.
Exactly, yes. And that is a very, very important point.
Okay, got it then. Okay, because then, okay, I understand now.
Awesome. Yeah, and sometimes they, on a lot of the exam questions, they won't necessarily say like opportunity cost. What they'll say is like which country has the comparative advantage. And when you hear comparative advantage, you should immediately say, I need to compute the opportunity costs for all of these goods to know which country has the comparative advantage, because computing the opportunity cost gives you the information you need to understand who has a comparative advantage in those goods.
Okay, got it. And with absolute, you just look at who makes the most, and it doesn't matter how much it costs to make. Like,
exactly.
okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like for kind of the problems too, so definitely like if you're looking at kind of the other notes piece, and when you're thinking about like some of these questions, so like if you look at a comparative and absolute advantage question and you don't know how to solve it, definitely make sure that you do. Or like for this one, like look at the graphs of world price and domestic price and know what it means if the domestic price is higher or lower than the world price. So like if that's the case, is the country going to be importing a good or exporting a good under which one of those scenarios? Yes, yeah. So the comparative advantage is a country that or country or company or person who can has a lower cost of production. Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yeah, and for this one too, I included this, I stole this from Quick Economics. So like this is a good way too, because I don't think I actually included a little like table in my slides for the different types of like goods. So I think this is a good way too. Like I find this really helpful actually to think about like the private goods as like excludable and rival. And just so kind of make sure that if you're having any trouble with those, that you're able to understand which one is which, because there will definitely be questions on the midterm that ask you how to, or if a good is, you know, a club good, common resource, private good, or public good. So definitely make sure to understand that. And also to willingness to pay questions, and questions about like, if a group of residents value something, value like an additional acre in a park, let's say, at each price level, make sure to understand how to work out if they are going to get a benefit from that park, like similar to this question. And then for 13, yeah, and for 13 too, just to clarify, because I think we kind of went over this, but I didn't actually like specifically mention this graph. But one of the questions we talked about was asking about average total cost and marginal cost. So this can kind of be helpful about thinking that, you know, under what scenario is that going to be true? Yeah, so total surplus in the case of the park. So for this one, basically what you would do is you would want to, so take the value that each resident has for the park. So this is a value each resident places on the park, and then look at the cost for the park and see what the value is. So like for this one, for example, we would have the total value would be the 60 plus the 160 plus the 180 plus the 220. And so that is the value to like all of the residents for this specific park. And that is their benefit for the park.
Okay, so this would be considered like the total surplus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And for this one specifically, because residents are voting, it's not so much concerned with the total surplus, but the surplus that each resident gets compared to the cost per resident, which in this case, the cost per resident is 150. So as long as 3 out of the 4 people have a value greater than 150, then they will vote for the park to be approved.
Okay, yeah, because I was just asking, because like one of the bullet points says how to find total surplus from that. So I was just wondering like how to find that. So like all you would do is just add up all their values. So here
Exactly.
the like technical total surplus would be 600.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it was 620.
Or 620. Yeah, probably 620. Yeah, because it's slightly greater.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So I think if anyone has like one last question, I would definitely be willing to take it. But since we're running a little short on time. Yeah, so it'll always be worded as value. Another way it could say is willingness to pay. So you can think of willingness to pay and value as being similar terms, because basically value is like how I personally value something, where willingness to pay is basically saying I would be willing to pay $220 for a new park. Yeah, so let me stop sharing, and if anyone has any other questions, let me stop recording too.